So, can we just acknowledge the absolute roller coaster of emotions that Grover had to go through on a daily basis during the Heroes of Olympus? We know that Grover created an empathy link between himself and Percy as far back as the Sea of Monsters, and this empathy link allows them to feel each other's emotions even across vast distances. We don't have any firm evidence to suggest that this can translate pain, but in the Trials of Apollo, we know that Grover craves blueberry pancakes because of this link, and that he can reach out to Percy in dreams as a result, as Percy can do with him too. So then let's take into consideration everything Percy went through during Heroes of Olympus, because this link wasn't broken by Percy's amnesia, it was just temporarily disconnected. Since the link is still active in the Trials of Apollo when Lester and Meg find Grover. Throughout the Son of Neptune, we know that Grover was trying to use the link to find Percy, but Percy was left unconscious for several months and couldn't respond. And if you want, we actually have a full video on why Hera needed to keep Percy in stasis until the last possible minute for her plan to work. So if you're interested in why Percy was left unattended for several months, be sure to go check that one out too. We know that the link can translate direct emotions since we see that in Wrath of the Triple Goddess after Grover drinks Hecate's mystery shake and inadvertently destroys the kitchen. The link isn't ever present, so we're going to be specifically focusing on points of heightened emotional stress that Grover was more likely to pick up on. When Percy does regain his memories, however, he doesn't actually get to see Grover, but the first thing that Grover probably felt was his reunion with Annabeth. Depending on your perspective, this might either spoil this really great scene or make it even better when we consider that in spirit, Grover was probably engaging with Percy's emotions as he reunited with Annabeth. He knew that they had found each other and that he was safe, which would have been a massive weight off of his shoulders, and all he needed to feel was the rush of Percy seeing Annabeth for the first time in months. When they got to the Argo 2, however, Percy's emotional whirlwind didn't let up. Please remember that Grover had no context for any of this. At no point does he actually know what is going on. He's just able to feel Percy's emotional response to any given situation. But exactly why Percy is feeling this way is a complete unknown to him. We know that he developed an intense fear of drowning after nearly being suffocated in the Son of Neptune. So even when he's in Phorcys's aquarium, which should have been his home turf, he's anxious and unsure of himself. From Grover's perspective, he would have no idea what's causing this anxiety, but it probably feels different from a direct battlefield confrontation. When Percy is in battle, his instincts kicked in, and even though his emotions are heightened, he knows what to do. And he's even remarked in the past that a straight fight is much more comfortable than the dread of not knowing what might happen. When he encounters Caesar or fights the giants in the Colosseum, Grover probably knows, but he understands that Percy is in his home domain, and trusts that Percy can handle himself in a fight. When we get to the Nymphaeum, however, Percy's fear rushes to the surface as the chamber not only gets flooded, but Percy realizes that he can't breathe in the inky black water that's contaminating the well. The cavern is getting flooded, and for the first time, Percy is completely out of his depth when it comes to water. This should be his home turf, and when it's not, it utterly terrifies him, bringing his already burdensome fear of drowning to the surface yet again. This wave of absolute terror probably spiked Grover's emotions, but that's not the worst of it. Remember, shortly after this, he has to part ways with Annabeth while she embarks on the quest to find the Athena Parthenos, which has to be done on her own, and leaving her again is unbearable. He's sending her into a complete unknown situation where she's going to have to face the test that dozens of Athena children before her had failed, and after having been away from her for so many months, we can only speculate as to the dread and anxiety that he was feeling about her being on her own. We know that he spent most of this time preoccupied with other fights, but that doesn't diminish the fact that he was still without her. When he does finally reunite with her though, it's in the aftermath of her fight with Arachne when the floor is crumbling around them. This is also where Annabeth gets dragged into Tartarus and Percy jumps in after her. And while he's talking to Nico, we see that he's accepting his fate and knows what must be done. He's terrified because he doesn't even know how he can even survive the fall, let alone trek through Tartarus and make it out alive in one piece. So there's no telling what sort of emotional whirlwind Grover was feeling now. Now, we don't officially know if the empathy link can reach all the way down to Tartarus or if there's some sort of exception. But we're going to be operating under the assumption that the empathy link is still active since we don't have any evidence one way or another. From here, we find it highly unlikely that Grover was able to sleep at all for the week that they were in Tartarus, surrounded by every monster, titan, and giant that they had ever killed. They had small amounts of reprieve in between, but the vast majority of their voyage through this inhospitable hellscape was spent in fear and dread. Even with the aid of Bob the Titan, they barely got a break, and Percy straight up thinks he's about to die several times. First is when Kelly has him and Annabeth pinned before Bob gets there. And later down the line, the Forest of the Erased surrounds him with curses of everyone who has ever wanted him to suffer. His last act before nearly being killed is to rush all of them in a last-ditch effort to save Annabeth, which is another very complicated spiral of emotions that almost results in Percy dying. We know that if one of them dies, it would severely damage the other mentally, so we don't know if Grover could feel Percy getting close to death, but Percy could definitely feel himself getting close to death, and we think that that would translate. After he is able to recover, Bob takes them to see Ocles, and we know that Percy's anger when facing Ocles was enough to make even Annabeth afraid of him. In the Blood of Olympus, which we'll get more into in just a moment, Percy talks about how Polybides almost suffocated him in poison. And when he talks to Jason about it afterwards, he straight up says that he didn't fight back because he felt like he deserved it after what he did to Achilles. He tells Jason point blank that he tried to kill her by choking her with her own poison. So this isn't a moment where Percy is an unreliable narrator and is downplaying his actions. He gave in to his dark side, and if Grover felt it, then this would have been a side of Percy that nobody has seen before, not even Percy. We know that he is fiercely loyal to his friends and will do anything to protect them, but we've never seen him dip this far into his anger. Again, Grover doesn't know why any of this is happening. So if something royally pissed off Percy to the nth degree, then Grover's first instinct is probably to worry about Annabeth, especially since he just fought off the forays of the Uriah like yesterday. After the situation with Achilles is done, he has to run through the Mansion of Night and then get to the Doors of Death while hoping that the Death Mist would hold. He mentions that the Death Mist doesn't just make him appear dead, it actually brings him close to death in order to fool the surrounding monsters. So there's no way to know for certain what Grover was feeling when Percy was shrouded in Death Mist. It might have actually been similar to the Uriah wounds where Percy was actually teetering on the brink of life and death. And if Grover could feel that Percy was nearly dead, then that probably would have terrified him for a multitude of different reasons. When the mist clears, however, we know that Percy faces the entity that, to this day, is the only figure that made him drop his sword, and that would be the living embodiment of Tartarus himself. This is a complete surrender. Percy knows that he doesn't have any fight left in him, and he's finally met his end. He drops his sword because in his mind, this is it, and Grover has no idea what could possibly get him to feel so utterly defeated. From here, the rest of the Blood of Olympus is pretty tame compared to Percy's Tartarus adventures, but Grover's mind would have most likely been on complete overdrive this entire time, especially because he doesn't actually have any information regarding what's going on. He's left to fill in the blanks for himself, and the dread of not knowing is almost always worse than having a straight answer, even if that answer is terrifying in its own right. The imagination is scary, especially when it has very little to go on. But when we do get a very brief glimpse of Grover with Rachel in the House of Hades, he seems to be holding it together. We know that at the same time, he's been dealing with his own set of responsibilities because the Romans are laying siege to Camp Half-Blood, and they're preparing to attack at any given moment. He's been scrambling to raise defenses and broker peace talks in order to try de-escalating the situation. So he's got enough on his own plate as it is, and this is not helping in the slightest. By the end of it, however, we know that everything ended up working out. But it would be fascinating to see a deep dive into exactly what Grover went through during this particularly tumultuous summer. We know that a third college admissions book is on the way, and that it would be a perfect place to touch on if this theory is true, but only time will tell. But that's our take on what Grover would have felt if the empathy link was translating everything Percy was going through during the Heroes of Olympus. What do you guys think? Do you think the link was still active? And if so, why didn't Percy feel anything that Grover was going through? As always, my friends, take care of each other, drink your nectar, and we'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, demigods.